Hi, I'm Randall from Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Lab, providing tips on language learning, culture, and human development. And one of the things that I've discovered since, I guess, the middle of this year is that there are such insightful, motivated, engaging teachers around the world. And I've had the privilege of interviewing many of them who have experienced a transition and transformation in their teaching, in part because of the pandemic that is impacting the world today. And I think what has always impressed me about so many teachers is this concept. I think many teachers are very chameleonic in their lives, ever adapting to the ebbs and flows of our profession. And I've also been excited of interviewing teachers who have shared their experiences and some vulnerability in being able to express their feelings of feeling lost, frustrated, and often at their wits' ends in trying to keep their lives together, balancing work and family. Well, today I have the honor of interviewing Pragya Adhikari from Nepal, and she's going to be talking about her journey into language teaching, talking about the transition to online teaching, and also the tips and tools and strategies that she has used to become a very successful teacher. And I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. So right now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring on our guest today. And Pragya, welcome to our episode.
Thank you, Randall, for having me here.
And I think people are going to really enjoy this episode. You're going to be talking about your transition into language teaching, finding meanings, success in the profession. So let's just get right into this and talk just a little bit about what we're going to be covering. We're going to be doing a personal introduction of you, talking a little bit about Nepal, your interest and your decision to become a language teacher, because I think people are really going to enjoy that. A little bit about the traditional face-to-face classroom there in Nepal, the impact that the pandemic has had on your teaching. And then we're going to get into the bulk, the meat of the presentation today, the episode about tips, tools, and strategies on what you have experienced in finding success. So let's just get right into that, Pragya, if we could. And let's just talk a little bit about your country, Nepal. And let's go ahead and preface that by talking a little bit about your family. Why don't we start right there?
Yep. So as Randall has introduced, my name is Pragya. My homeland is Nepal. Currently, I'm residing in Canada, Vancouver. So Nepal, it's a small country. I don't know if many of you have heard about it. It's in South Asia. So everyone who doesn't know Nepal, but there must be people who know where is Mount Everest. So I'm proud to say that highest peak in the world is in our country. So very unique thing I would like to talk about Nepal is that our population is almost more than 26 millions, but we have 40 different races and tribes in our country. If I tell you about the language, we have our native language is called Nepali, but there are 4 major languages that's spoken. That's Nepali, Nepal Bhasha, Maithili, and Bhojpuri. So those are 4 major languages that's spoken in our country.
And I'm glad you're not going to test us on those today.
No, I'm not going to do that, Randall, for sure. Hindu is a very dominated religion in our country. However, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism is highly practiced. So I think I feel very happy to say that we have a huge range of cultural heritage in our country. So I would like to talk about the flag. Randall, if you could show the flag. I think that's
absolutely.
Let's
go back to that.
Talking about. So we're the only country in the world who has a triangular flag. And I think that's a very unique thing in itself. If you see
and Pragya, you haven't asked about my tie. If I have I do not have the flag. I need to write the actual maker or the producer of this flag, the tie, to see if they could get it imprinted on it.
I'd be really happy, Randall, if you could do that. So this is a brief introduction about my flag. I just want to talk about my flag a bit.
Oh, okay.
So it's like the red color in the flag. It shows the bravery of Nepalese people. So when British were ruling all the countries, we were the only country which was not ruled by British, and we never have an independent day in our country. So I think that's a very unique thing about our country. So the blue line, it shows the peace and harmony, and it says the sun and the moon is like, till the universe has sun and moon, our country will be there. So I think that's a very unique thing of our country.
Super. And thank you for taking the time to explain that.
My
Let's
pleasure.
talk a little bit about some of these pictures before we get right into the broadcast and discuss the topic for today.
Yes, so synchronously, if you can see, those are the festivals that are celebrated in different areas. That's one is in Tarai, one is in Kathmandu itself. One is of Namche Bazaar, that's the baseline of Mount Everest. You can see the cultural squares where different monuments are made and World Heritage sites are over there. So this is all about natural beauty of Nepal.
Wonderful. And again, we also have this particular slide, a little bit about some of the dress.
Yes, these are our, as I said, we have 40 different races and tribes in our country. These are some of the traditional dress of our tribes. So you can see Newari dress over there. You can see Tamang dress over there. So it'll take a huge long time if I start describing, but you can see these are traditional dresses.
Well, that's great. All right. So let's actually go into, let's take a look at some of the comments that are coming in. Perhaps we have, let's see here. And again, some of the, I'm not sure how to say that name. Hello from San Francisco. Please let us know. I don't know if that is Nepalese or not. Sudep, welcome. Pragya, all the best. Jorge from Bolivia again. Hello, Randall. I'm happy to see you again. Great. And it's great to see so many voices. Mona from Tunisia says, Dear Pragya, wonderful to see you live today. And Glenn, my friend, says, I visited Nepal, one of the most beautiful places on earth. Great to hear that. And again, we're having some other comments coming in. I think perhaps people from Nepal that are sharing their thoughts. Bimala, good to see you. Proud of you, dear Pragya. I don't know if that's someone you know. I'm assuming so.
Yes, he is my colleague and my best friend.
Oh, great. And then Mona says Nepal is very rich and varied culture. And I think you've just mentioned that so articulately. So let's just go ahead and get right into the broadcast and some other things. Let's talk a little bit about your decision to become an English teacher. Everyone has a story, and it's often very unique. So if you could share a little bit about your story in becoming an English teacher.
Okay, so it's like I'm an MBA graduate by profession, to be honest. I have completed a master's in finance. But in the introduction picture, everyone had noticed a little girl. That's my daughter. So she's the main inspiration for me to become a teacher. It's not about language teacher. It's about being a teacher. So she's my main motivation. So because of her, I am a teacher. I feel very proud to say that. So why did I become an English teacher specifically is because in Nepal, all the subjects are taught in English. That sounds very different, but our medium of teaching is English. So I thought, like, if a child needs to do something good in subjects, they have to know how to speak English or do good in English. So if I have to say, it's like, if you're weak in English, you're weak in maths, you're weak in social, you're weak in science, everything. So I decided to be an English teacher, for which I upgraded myself. I took a lot of professional training. Currently, I'm pursuing my master's in education degree. I went to Thailand to do my TEFL course for 1 month. I learned the techniques of teaching English to non-native speakers. And then I started my career as an English teacher.
Great. And that's for many people thinking that you got an MBA in finance, you worked in the finance, then you transitioned to teaching. Certainly that is a big transition, but it's what you mentioned, that it was your daughter, other motivations to proceed and to continue in that career. That's wonderful. So thanks for sharing that. Well, let's just talk a little bit now, a little bit about a typical face-to-face classroom. This is pre-pandemic.
Yes. So normally our class strengths are 25 to 30. So we have 25 to 30 students in a class. A typical in-class sessions are very easy. You go to the class, you greet your students, you take out your textbook or learning aids and you start teaching. They do lots of practicals, they do lots of group works. So that way it's easy. When you can interact face-to-face, it always has a different advantage. So these are some samples of my in-class teaching.
Okay. And thank you for sharing that. And certainly we welcome comments, from people out there. Feel free to share, why did you become an English teacher? Was that an easy decision to make? Certainly that's kind of hard to do. Mohammed says, thank you very much for the information. Greetings from Bangladesh. Also, Mario, you are a great teacher. Hi from Colombia. And we just have another comment. from Israel. What a small top mountain due to country. The same goes for the top-notch teacher. So a high mountain, a high teacher. I think that's a real praise to you, Pragya, for the things that you're doing. And perhaps we can talk just a little bit about some of the projects that you have been involved in. I know, Pragya, that teachers don't like to talk about their achievements per se, but perhaps you could share a little bit about some of the projects that you've been involved in, and perhaps in what ways can other teachers do the same?
So Randall, I have been very lucky while it comes to embedding international dimension in my curriculum. So whichever organization I worked for different projects. So those were always related to exchanging and learning from international students. So that has been a very good exposure for my students as well. The pictures you can see here is a recent project that I did with a school in Tunisia, where the lead teacher was Mona. So it's about exchanging culture box. We were exchanging our culture. We wanted to know each other. When we do the projects online, trust me, it's very challenging. You have to do it via Skype. You just have to have a phone session. You just have to share your work. But when you make it more personalized by exchanging some of the culture box, I think it's a very personal way. Luckily, I have been able to achieve few very good achievements in my life. I have been awarded Global Teacher Award for 2018 and 19, where there were teachers from different countries. And then from British Council, luckily 2 years, I have worked for International School Award, and I have won the International Project Coordinator Award for continuous 2 years.
Now, just for everyone to know, you are not going to talk about that today. I encouraged you to talk about that. And I think that's just a real tribute to the work that you're doing. And also, if you could, right after the broadcast, maybe put into the show notes on Facebook a little bit more information about how other teachers can get involved in that. Certainly, I think that would be useful for people around the world. So Pragya, thank you very much for sharing that.
I'll definitely do that, Randall.
Okay. So the other thing is, now we're going to switch to online classes. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that you're doing or have done. And this is going to be the bulk of the broadcast today. And so if you could just tell us a little bit, Pragya, a little bit, you were living and working in Nepal. Now you are working and living in Canada and teaching remotely. Could you just give us a little bit of background on, again, where you're teaching, what a traditional classroom looks like, and then we'll get into these points right here.
Yes, so it's a very interesting thing. When pandemic started, it was around March and April, which is a session break for our country. The academic session ends during March and April. So when pandemic started, everyone thought like, oh, it's not a big thing. It'll be gone within 15, 20 days. No one was prepared. So we thought like, it's going to be a holiday for 2 months. And after 2 months, we'll be back to our class. So everyone was done. But slowly the pandemic started getting worse. And now there was a striking point when everyone started thinking how we're going to teach students, because that's a big challenge.
Absolutely.
Everyone started discussing, like, using social media, everyone is comfortable, but teaching online is not everyone's piece of cake, I think. It's like really challenge. You need to upgrade yourself. I might say I'm very good at computers.
And if I could jump right in here, and this is where you and I, Pragya, are interested in having people share in this conversation, because you just mentioned in Nepal, you thought, well, many people thought it would just be a 2-month break, then things will get back to normal. Certainly, we're interested in hearing from teachers around the world. What does your online class look like today? Because many teachers, I think, are pulling their hair out, trying to figure out how to make that work. So as we certainly invite teachers to share on the same topic as we go through this today.
So that was the case. And then we started upgrading ourselves. We started from a very basic thing called Zoom. We wanted to know how Zoom can be used as an online teaching platform. We struggled with switching on the videos. We struggled with using the whiteboards. And then slowly when we updated ourselves with it, we've started with Google Classroom. Now,
let's pause here. What we're going to do is, you just mentioned a little bit about some of the frustration, challenges, and so forth. So if we could, as you're mentioning Zoom, let's go ahead and go through some of these together. We're going to take us right from how many students in your class, from turning on the camera to getting into Zoom, and then going through, as you mentioned, Google Classroom. We'll talk about that. We'll talk a little bit about Flipgrid, Canva, Padlet. And just so people know, and I think this is kind of an important topic, that everything that we're talking about today is going to be on Facebook and YouTube. In other words, as you're watching the broadcast right now, you should be able to see all of the links to the things that we're talking about today. So sorry for that interruption right there. It's kind of just leading us into the discussion. So take it away, Pragya. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the particulars.
Okay, so currently I am teaching in Urban boarding school. That's in Western Nepal. It's a semi-urban school. So you can think how much access they have for online resources. But I proudly say that I have been able to deliver my online classes successfully in that area, despite the huge time difference. That's 13 hours, 45 minutes. It's a huge, huge time difference. So normally for my online teaching, how it goes is I try to use two platforms. One is Microsoft Teams and one is Zoom. So both are the online teaching platform that I normally use for my live discussions.
And what is the difference? I mean, I know there are a lot of teachers
when I have to see them face to face and I have to talk to them, I use this.
Oh, okay. So I think there are a lot of teachers that might use one over the other. They might find more benefit over the other. And certainly we'd like to hear that as well. But you were saying, why do you use one over the other in some cases?
Like for breakout rooms, if I have to do breakout rooms, I feel Microsoft Teams is more comfortable when you have to do breakout rooms and discussions. But when you have to use whiteboard and the mouse automation, like I can use other person's mouse, I use the session Zoom.
Okay.
So it all depends on the types of lecture that I'm giving.
Okay. So let's talk about probably the perennial challenge that teachers have is this. Good night. So how do you manage that? How do you manage that? And it's interesting that sometimes there are cultural reasons why people may or may not have on their camera. But in your particular case with your students, how do you manage the camera on, camera off, whether using Microsoft Teams or Zoom?
So normally, Random, I don't have issues of switching off the camera with cultural respect. However, there are students who doesn't want to be in the camera. I do face that challenge a lot. So how I started is like, first I tried giving them some guidelines why switching on camera is important, but still if they're not listening, they are children, you have to adjust. So I think teachers are all about adjusting. So what I tend to do is like, every time I teach them, after every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I launch a poll.
Launch a poll, right? A poll. Okay.
Yeah. So when I launch a poll, I come to know that they are still in the class and they're engaged. So I think that's one way where you can track your students if they're really listening to you, even if the cameras are off.
And I think that's a really underutilized feature, whether it be something independent from Zoom or within Zoom and so forth, just to provide engagement. Because a lot of times people want to know that their voices are being heard. Just like right now, we have some 9 additional comments, and people often want to hear their voices heard regarding that. Let me just take a look at some of the comments that are coming in right now regarding this. We have Aline says, I use Zoom for live classes and Google Classroom to assign homework. And I know you're going to be talking a little bit about that, Pragya, about that, how both work together in a different way, certainly. Sharad says, she has been a great teacher. I am a proud student. She is very encouraging. So Sharad, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, perhaps not, feel free to share in what way is Pragya motivating you. Here, another comment from Israel says, when you discover that the joy is to deliver another word, then you know that you belong to teaching. It happened to me in Spanish when I discovered that nieve is snow. So when you learn new words from different languages, it opens up your world to new culture and experiences. Aline says, let's see here, Zoom has been used for breakout rooms. Great to hear that. Shamim says, you're really presenting very useful information. Great for your valuable presentation. And again, Bimala says you're a great teacher. So let's then go back here. So we were talking a little bit about Zoom, and you have certain techniques to get students to become engaged with polls. Let's talk about some of the other tools and services that you're using throughout your class, starting from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, so that's how I start my class. So once I start my class, I always start with warm-up activities.
Okay.
So for warm-up activities, it's always better to know, like, in a traditional classroom, we tend to take attendance, right? So
Right.
here, I just try to figure out if everyone is ready for the class by asking some random fun questions. And sometimes I start up like, okay, today, how many of you are going to switch off your camera? So that's like a reverse question you can always try with your students. Like, that's a very fun way to talk.
Now, how many students again?
I teach around 25 to 30.
Okay, 35 students. So again, there are probably other teachers that are listening to that are thinking, this is right for me. Please share your experience, because if you throw out a question and you have 35 students, maybe 3, 4, 5 students might participate, but your experience might be different.
True. So after the warm-up activities, I always start with my presentations. So if I have to do a presentation, there are different ways. One, either a day ahead, I would have posted my PDFs in Google Classroom, and they can always take the notes. Or I do it via PowerPoint or Prezi. Prezi is another interesting app which you can use for presentations.
And I have that, just so people know, Prezi, that people can look in Facebook. I have a link to that as well. And perhaps take a moment to explain what that is.
So Prezi is more like a PowerPoint, but it has more colorful and vibrant options which you can use for your students, because PowerPoint has some limited access, but Prezi has a very broad access. And you don't have to create an individual slide for it. It goes on continuous. So that's one very big advantage of Prezi. And it's an online tool, so students can be very comfortable using that.
And everyone asks, is it free?
It has a trial period for 3 months if you have to use a limited resources. Okay. Otherwise, you have to pay.
And the one thing is, the reason why I mention that, there are many services that I use that I pay for that are worth the price. It just might extend the functionality of what you're doing.
Yes, I agree to that. But if teachers, they don't want to pay, I think Prezi, it's still a good option if they can use it. There are lots of features which are enough in a free version as well.
Okay, so you have the warm-up activities. You might use Prezi and so forth to kind of introduce concepts. Tell us a little bit more about the activities that go on and some of the other tools that you're using.
So when I introduce my content, after that, as I said, I keep on checking my teaching by launching polls. So polls is one of the best ways. You can either directly launch polls in Zoom, or you can use an app called Mentimeter. So you can just open Mentimeter. You just have to provide a code to your students. They will log in with the code, and you can always display the results. So
and that's wonderful. And again, that's in the show notes on Facebook. Mentimeter doesn't have a limitation. It has limitations on how many questions that you might create, but the numbers of people that you can actually poll is, I think, unlimited. And I know they're adding other fixtures as well. So it's great to hear you're mentioning using polls within Zoom or perhaps in Mentimeter.
Yes. So after that, normally there are times for home assignments. So for home assignments or for concept checking, if there's a home assignment, I tend to do it from Google Classroom. But if there are different teaching aids that I post in Google Classroom, I can always use Microsoft Sway. So that's a digital book. It's very easy to create. You can create any number of pages, digital book, so that it's attractive for your students according to your age.
Say that again, Microsoft.
Sway.
Okay. Okay. And I think we have those in the notes as well.
Yeah. So another one is Flipgrid. For Flipgrid, there are students who are not so much technology, who are not comfortable typing. So you can always use a lesson for Flipgrid. So Flipgrid is like a short video where you post a question and they can speak for 2 to 3 minutes. Normally, I limit that to 2 to 3 minutes. However, the software allows you to speak till 4 to 5 minutes, but I limit it to 2 to 3 minutes. So you can always see the video recordings. And the best part about Flipgrid is if I'm posting an answer, whole class can view the answers.
Yeah. And this is a wonderful tool. I started using Flipgrid maybe about 1.5 years ago. And it's like, a video discussion and recording platform where in the past at our institution or many institutions probably around the world, they invested in, high-end computer labs and recording equipment and software. And now with Flipgrid, it's just a matter of using your phone. The teacher can create a task and the student can record themselves a short task or whatever, and then it sends it to the teacher's account completely free. And what I really like about this is Microsoft, when it acquired Flipgrid about 2 years ago, you knew that this was going to be backed by a company like Microsoft, and it was going to remain free, because I think in the past it was like $65 a year. So wonderful service to bring up.
Yes. So, and the best thing is, if someone is not comfortable with the laptop, you can always use it in your phone as well. So smartphone does have access to Flipgrid as well.
Let's take a look at some other comments that are coming on in. Uma says, is online teaching as beneficial as normal classes? Now, I think this is a really important question coming in here. And I think perhaps we can address this in part right now, and hopefully over the rest of the presentation, talking about, is it more beneficial for assessment, for presenting materials, for taking attendance? Any initial thought about that question?
So there is a huge difference between normal classes and online teaching. That's for sure. There are differences when you do, especially when it comes to classroom management. I think that's the biggest challenge you face between face-to-face teaching and online teaching. But when it comes to presentation and assessment, I think you have more ways to do it. I personally believe that it's a beneficial tool, but you can't have a comparison because both have their pros and cons.
Yeah, and I think we're probably going to speak a little bit later. There are certain things that I do right now that I didn't do in the past, but I wouldn't go back to the past. It has enhanced the experience of using online teaching tools, has really enhanced what I'm trying to do online. So again, we have some other comments coming in, perhaps from your students. She is a great teacher. That is certainly evidenced by some of the things that you're saying. Again, I can't read the name.
That's in Nepali. It says Pushkar.
Okay, and Sharad says she teaches us with unique techniques. Learning online has never been easier. So maybe going back to the comment of what Uma mentioned about what are the benefits? We'll certainly talk about that. Mona from Tunisia says Prezi is perfect for presentation. And I know that we've had other teachers that have talked about Genially. That was Kayla Vargas from Costa Rica introduced that to me. Another comment, she makes online classes full of learning activities. We're going to talk some more about those right here in a minute. Juan Guillermo says, hey, Randall, you're a great role model for us. And I think we see so many teachers like you, Pragya, that are leading the way. And Glenn says, great tips and tools. Thanks for sharing. So let's now go back to, we've talked a little bit about Flipgrid, great tool for speaking assessment, because I use this, you use this, and in many ways, I would never go back to actually any computer lab or platform like I did in the past. I would probably continue to use Flipgrid in so many different ways. So we've talked, you've talked a little bit about Zoom, Microsoft Teams. You talked about warm-up activities, talking a little about Prezi. I mentioned Genially, talking about Microsoft Sway, Flipgrid, and let's talk about Padlet, how that figures into your teaching.
So normally Padlet is like a journal writing, blog writing online platform where students I can just post a question. They don't have to even buy the program. It's free. You can use it for free. I can post a question and they can always post their answers over there. Or for example, I'm doing some presentation. I can always break down the presentation and post that in Padlet as a note making so that they can have access anytime and they can use it for their learning.
Okay. And one of the things I think you and I, Pragya, realize that each one of these platforms, whether it be Flipgrid, whether it be Padlet, we could spend an hour, 2 hours delving into each and one of these. But certainly what we're doing is we're sharing some of the tools that you find useful. So let's talk okay, you're in the class, you're doing a presentation with Prezi, and I know, or any of these other tools, how do you kind of bring students back to the classroom? For example, they might have their cameras off, they seem a little bit less engaged. What are some of the tools and techniques beyond some of the technology or connected with any of these tools that have been most useful for you?
So what I tend to do is, Randall, when I prepare my lesson plan, I make sure that I use lots of infographics for them. So when I use infographics, I use the app like Canva.
Okay.
So when I have infographics, students are always attracted to see the infographics and they know how to move forward with the class. So another way is a storyboard. I remember being a kid or an adult, I still love reading comics. So if you try to create infographic comics, that's always engaging for students. So I can create a dialogue from a storyboard and I can leave one blank. So my students will complete it. So that's more engaging for them.
Yeah. And again, with Canva, even the thumbnails that I create for my presentations and advertising episodes and reporting, I use Canva, a wonderful tool to do, create visuals and so forth. So creating visuals can stimulate learning, keep students engaged and so forth. Okay, so we've talked about Flipgrid, we talked about Canva, we talked about a little bit about Padlet. Let's talk a little bit about Screencastify, and I also use Screenomatic. How do you use that with some of these tools in your classroom teaching?
Okay, so as we all are teaching online, there are times when internet is not available. Just imagine I have a class and boom, internet goes off. Now, what am I supposed to do? So what I tend to do
that never happens.
So what I tend to do is I just record my lessons and then I post it in Google Classroom or in Padlet so that my students can always review those lessons. It's nothing like they have to read everything. I'll be recording on my voice. So some way they know that teacher is still explaining.
Okay.
So I think Screencastify is a very good tool you can use. It normally is used with Google Chrome. You can just add an extension to Google Chrome and then you're ready to go.
So in other words, if you have a student that might miss a class, or you might have elements of the class that you'd like to record and share later, like as a review and so forth, you can use this Screencastify. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And how do you share that, with the students? Does it have its own platform where you can create a link and then share with students?
Yes. So you just have to go to Google Chrome, add an extension, start recording, and you can download the link and you can just post the link. So it's ready.
So it's saved on their server, on their service. Okay. And one of the things that people may or may not know, and thank you for sharing that particular service, I also use Zoom. And for those that are using the Zoom Pro version, I pay about $16 a month for something like that. And what you can do is with the free version of Zoom, you can record and save to your computer. And I guess then you could, for example, upload it to YouTube or something like that. But with the Pro version, it also has the ability to save the entire Zoom class and then share with students. So certainly, I'm glad that you're bringing up different possibilities. All right. So we've talked about those different services. So again, we've talked about Zoom. We've talked about warm-up activities. We've talked about Prezi, Flipgrid, Storyboard, Canva. What about Quizlet? That's something that you haven't mentioned yet.
Yes, so that's the assessment techniques that I'm going to talk about. Okay. So, of course, when you teach, you tend to, it's nothing like you're just talking and you don't know how much your students have learned. So assessment is very important. So there are different ways of assessment you can do.
Well, why can't you just say, are there any questions?
Yeah.
How effective is that?
That's very effective, Randall. Do you know why? Because I get a chorus answer, all clear.
All right, so let's talk about some of your real assessment techniques and tools.
Yes, so it's more about chorus answers. So I tend to do more personalized assessment techniques. And to be honest, assessment techniques are very easy when you do it online, because you can use Google Forms, you can use Microsoft Forms, you can use a platform called Quizlet, where you can go and you can create quiz according to your topic. You just have to share the link with your students and you'll get all the answers. So I think Quizlet is a very informative topic. And there's a term called CCQs. I don't know if everyone uses that. So whatever you teach or whatever you deliver, concept checking questions.
So concept checking questions.
So you can always use CCQs with whatever you teach. So I think that's a very good concept. And sometimes we tend we're keeping on giving instruction to students, but they don't listen to us. So there's a technique to check that as well. It's called instruction checking questions. So
give us an example of each one.
Okay, just for ICQs. So I might say okay, Randall, when I'm speaking, you're not allowed to speak. So I say like, Randall, I told you to speak. Why are you not speaking? So you can come back and say, no, ma'am, you just told me not to speak. So that's the instruction checking questions.
Okay, that's really cute because important because a lot of students will say, what? What did you say? So it forces them to be accountable, and it requires no technology. So it's a really good pedagogical tool. So repeat that. What is it called?
Instruction checking questions.
Okay, instruction checking questions. And then the other, CCQ?
Concept checking questions.
So give an example of that.
Okay, so I introduced my country, Nepal. So right now I can just say, okay, everyone in chat box, can you write, Nepal has a rectangular flag. Is it true or false? So if someone writes,
it's true.
Yeah, it's true. So I know that I need to focus on you more.
Okay, I paused too long. Okay, so those are really key concepts. They don't require technology, but again, maybe using different technology through Zoom, checking. You see students have turned on the camera, maybe not watching, but certainly this provides some feedback to you, informal feedback, but some accountability on their part.
Yeah, like ICQs and CCQs, that are those techniques that I really used in my in-class teaching, and that has become very important for my online teaching as well. Okay. The only difference is right now I use more of forms for that, for concept checking, but instruction checking, I tend to do it orally.
So let's real quickly, we've talked about Google Classroom. We've talked about Flipgrid. We've talked about Canva, which is a designing tool. We talked about Padlet. And again, what we would like to hear from you, the audience, is what are some of the teaching tips, tools that you're using to manage your classroom as well. So let's take a look, if we can, just for a moment with any of the comments that are coming in. Let's see here. Mona says, I also use Genially. That's kind of like Prezi. It's great. Another comment, I have seen her presentation and everything she creates, she does with such perfection. The best thing I love about her is that she can grab the audience attention so nicely till the end. And I think these type of instructional questions that you've just given, really, if I were in your classroom, boy, I'd have to be paying attention, staying. Okay. And so I think that's really important as well. We can't read all of the questions here and comments. Cassia says, greetings from Brazil. Here, the teenagers don't complain about online classes, but it's not the same for students. The parents complain that they don't want to stay at the computers for a long time. It's a real challenge. How do you balance that from Cassia from Brazil?
Randall, for that, I want to share something. These days, the technology have become such a way that we can't control screen time for our learners. We can't control screen time. That's a very normal thing in everyone's house. So the best way is just trying to be more creative, how we can just transfer their screen time to a creative way. So I think Microsoft Sway can be one of the best ways. Just create some fun way of digital book.
Microsoft Sway.
So they can create a digital book. That app creates a digital book. It's very easy. You just have to share the link with your parents, and then they can show that to the students. So in that way, the screen time is being utilized in a more productive way.
And I think everything that you mentioned, and I think Cassia was mentioning from Brazil, is that teachers, I think parents are concerned about the level of engagement that students are having, to what degree are teachers engaging the students? Because I mean, some of my children are taking online classes right now, and it's kind of like the teacher wonders why everyone has their camera off. And my answer is, well, give them a purpose to have it on. And I think some of the things that you're suggesting is regular checks, polls, questions, change of pace activities, I think makes a real difference as well. Sudeep says, our June school misses you. That's where you teach. Is that right?
Yeah, true.
Okay. You are a gem. Whenever you are here, wherever you are, whatever you do, I wish you all the best. And that's great. All right. So let's go ahead as we are kind of wrapping up some ideas for today. We've talked right here about these different platforms, warm-up activities, presentations, Flipgrid, Padlet, and so forth. How do you go about winding down your class? So you've done all these activities, how do you do a smooth transition to the next class and assigning homework per se?
Okay, so my way of winding up a class is always fun. I don't tend to do too much of like questioning. So I just tell them, so students, can you just share with me what went wrong to our class today? So someone might tell me that my internet was not working, your voice was cracking, or something like that. So sometimes I tend to tell them, okay, so can you share one good thing? And after telling 3, 4 things, they can always come up with one good thing. So another one would be like, when I end the class, I say, okay, so today's lesson was this. Do you think next time we should do this, or you'll find something more interesting? Okay. And trust me, these days, students are more techno freak than us. We can always get ideas from them.
And it sounds like you're opening up yourself to say, I want feedback from you. I want to make this class meaningful. I need to hear your voices. That's what you're trying to say, right?
Yes. So that's one thing that I really do with my classes. And then I tell them, okay, so these are the materials that I have prepared that are posted in business platforms you can always access. So if you have any concerns, just contact me. But yes, teachers do make sure that they don't contact you mid of the night. So give them a time frame, because I know because of the pandemic, we are like working more than 24 hours. It's something very to say.
And I think a lot of part-time teachers became full-time teachers in so many different ways once the pandemic began, because now they're doing everything. They're learning how to do things with different tools and so forth. And I think that's really important. And you said, again, for people to recognize you're living in Vancouver, Canada, but you're teaching online classes. That is certainly commendable to try to, maintain that type of schedule. So let's talk as we wrap up. Certainly, we're wrapping up some of the ideas. Please talk a little bit about some of the permanent changes to your teaching. Okay, so talk a little bit about pre-pandemic. This is what I did. And now we're in the middle still of the pandemic. But some of the things that, wow, I would never go back to what I was doing before. Or some of the things that you would certainly continue to do even when you were doing those before the pandemic as well. So permanent changes.
So for assessments, I'll definitely use my online platforms. That's a very easy way to do it. So I wouldn't like to waste my time preparing lots of worksheet. I would tend to do it more with my online technique. And the other thing is, like, being an introvert all my life, I always get nervous speaking to people. But one thing that Flipgrid has taught me is, like, you can always come out of your comfort zone and speak. So that's one tool that I want my students to continue all the time.
Great. So as we're wrapping up, I mean, when I look at some of the permanent changes in my own teaching, I've mentioned before, I wish that a year ago I had invested in Zoom or Microsoft Teams. I mean, there's so many things that not having really any familiarity with Zoom at the beginning of the year, that's one thing that I will continue to use for classroom teaching, for meeting with students, for consulting. Certainly that is one example. And you've mentioned some great tips in managing pedagogically ways of handling the classroom in really great ways. So if you could, for example, let's go ahead and talk about just some final tips for those of teachers that are trying to find their way, trying to find best practices and balancing technology and sound pedagogy. What would be your final comments to teachers around the world?
So Randall, I have always believed in one thing, that we are lifelong learners. So we can never be perfect. So never imagine that we have a perfect classroom setting, or everything is never perfect. According to situation, you adjust. So keep learning and keep motivating your students. It's always good to learn from your students as well. We can accept the fact that they are more technology friendly compared to us. So you should never be ashamed of learning. So I really think teachers can keep on upgrading themselves. There are lots of websites where they can do free online classes or free professional development courses, which help them a lot.
Yeah. And a couple of comments that I'd like to bring in here near the end. Soraya says, what techniques do you utilize if your students are shy or they feel embarrassed in Zoom classes? And perhaps maybe this is one technique that you've learned since, the pandemic, started. What are some of the things that you do? I think that's a really important comment to bring in here. And that's from Suraya.
Yes. So the thing is, like, whenever you're doing an online class, never use the technique of picking someone and asking them a question. That's where your concept checking and instruction checking questions work on. Yeah. That will always save you from embarrassment. They are shy speaking, but they will be comfortable using a chat box or using polls. So that's one of the greatest way. And when you do flip grids, that's individual recording, they'll be more comfortable because they are not talking to a whole mass. That way they can always improve themselves and they can find confidence in them.
And I think what you mentioned again is using polls and the chat feature. I know that many platforms have the chat where students can comment directly to the teacher anonymously. So using that particular feature, the chat feature within Zoom, can certainly be a real tool. Glenn Penrod from the US says, excellent presentation. Thank you, Pragya. Wow, that's a real tribute to the work that you're doing. And Kasia says, thanks for your comments. And I'm not sure if that's Kasia or Kasia. I apologize, Kasia. You're very nice. We need to interact with students, right? Creativity is necessary. And that's what is being shared near the end of the presentation. Well, I just want to thank you so much, Pragya, for joining in the presentation. Certainly, we both realize that in creating any particular online class, there are a lot of different tools that needed to be used, but I'm glad that you weaved into the presentation different teaching techniques to evaluate and get feedback, informal assessment from students, asking questions that really make a difference in their language teaching. And I want to thank you so much, Pragya, for joining us today. And thank you for sharing about your country. That's one of the things that I really enjoy about these presentations is that people can talk about their countries, their flags, and what is so meaningful to them. So thank you very much for joining us today, Pragya.
Thank you so much, Randall, for giving me a platform to share my techniques. And I would love to talk to all the teachers and know some techniques that I can learn myself. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And again, feel free to reach out to Pragya for other comments. I know that I always encourage my guests to share their comments, to respond to comments within Facebook so that you could reach out to her. Perhaps you can share in a collaborative project with her as well. Well, this, as always, wraps up this episode. Always, your voice is really matter in changing the world. And so signing off from here from Utah in the United States, have a great day and an